Unnecessary intro song to totally waste your time. I was talking with an internet friend of mine who I met one time when she was traveling. But she was complaining about how dull most conversation is with most people. You know, she'd gone to a dinner party or something, and she realized that there just was likely to be no depth. You know, she wasn't finding any depth to a conversation. And that led me into thinking about this topic too, and how I feel the same way. And considering all the complaints I've had recently with, you know, people jumping the gun and just automatically demanding that their fantasy about the Epstein saga and all the pieces that they put together and how he's a spy and how every single person he ever shook hands with is probably a pedophile that drinks the blood of infants, you know. And Dan Bongino and all those guys, they know it, but they're protecting them because the government is satanic and, you know, blah, blah, blah. All things that might be true. But the thing is people have made the claims based on speculation. You know, they didn't see it, they weren't there, but they've imagined it, and they've seen movies like Eyes Wide Shut, and they've, you know, so they filled in the blanks, and this fantasy is what they want to believe, and etc. And, you know, I've been really bored with the people's analysis of this because I can clearly see that they're basing it off of speculation rather than evidence, because if they had the evidence, we could trot it around and we'd be positive. We'd say, look, we have these videos of Bill Clinton, you know, doing horrendous things to a child. You know, we have them. We don't have to imagine them. It's right here, you know. But so I was thinking about this, and I think just for the sake of being simple, there are two types of people in the world, right? There are people who are critical, and there are people who are, well, let's just say there are people who seek to destroy their own claims and their own arguments, and then there are people who primarily seek to support their own claims, ideas, and perceptions. You know, I fall into the first category. And it's been this way my whole life, ever since I was a very, very young kid with my mother. You're so argumentative. You're always arguing. You're such a contrarian. You always argue. And, you know, this is also kind of where weirdos like Sam Harris get my attention, where he says there's no free will, because I don't remember ever choosing my personality. I don't ever remember deciding, I'm going to be an argumentative person. I'm going to be a contrarian. It's just my natural inclination is to go, well, wait, can that be right? It's to defend, it's to be a contrarian. It's to play devil's advocate. And the reason is not to upset the other person. It's not to upset myself, because it's not like I need another person to do this. I'm not a contrarian only when I'm with other people. I'm a contrarian in the moment that I'm making these tapes. When I'm thinking, I go, if I come up with an idea and I think, oh, this might be true, my first inclination is to go, well, why isn't that true? You know, how are you wrong there? And go down the trail of trying to find a hole in my argument, which I can often find, which is oftentimes it leads you to dichotomy, where it's just like, wow, multiple things can exist at once. You know, it's the yin and the yang, basically. So, again, I'm kind of thinking, and this is the way I've changed my thinking a lot over the years, from individualism, which I still support, by the way. It's the only possible policy that can be fair to the outliers, you know, and you need to make room for the outliers. But I found that most people just aren't that way. They don't have any interest in destroying their arguments. For whatever reason, they're more interested in finding evidence to support their arguments and destroy the other person's argument. It doesn't matter what cost. And to me, that's just asking for trouble, because you're not going to think of the ways that they can destroy your argument. And then you're going to double down on stuff that's stupid. And then you're going to double down on it even when you find out you're wrong, because you're programmed to be right. Okay, so what I'm saying is, interestingly, there's a side effect of trying to destroy your own argument. Well, you'll end up being right. But it's not about being right. It's not about some victory or some competition against an idea or a person. It's about having your worldview match reality, which is not subject to your view. You know, whatever you think about reality, your opinion about reality never shifts. There's one reality, okay? There's not your reality and my reality. No, there's one reality. How much does your perception of reality match reality? And I guess for whatever reason, since I was young, I preferred my version of my opinion or perception of reality to match it as much as possible, which is why I've changed my mind over and over and over and over again with no trouble throughout my life, you know? But that's also meant that I've left friends that I've made who are the other type behind, you know, because initially you might start out with an idea. You know, I think the world operates like this. I'll use an example that one of my early best friends said. He said that when he was little, he used to believe that clouds were flat on the bottom because they were sliding around on a big glass plate. And I had never thought of that, but I thought, I can see why you'd say that. But, you know, let's say that he had told somebody about this, or somebody had told him about this. And then they go around going, yeah, well, that's the clouds on glass plate theory, blah, 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 blah. They go and they find every reason to support it. And but then you find out it's not true, and they don't want to bend. They don't want to budge. But meanwhile, I'm going, yeah, it turns out that that's not the way it works. There's no, you know, those people get upset, and you have to leave them because they won't join you in reality. They want to hold on to their whatever they said. And then maybe they have pride based on it. They have a reputation staked on it. They published a paper. They made T-shirts. Now they have merch. They have a whole warehouse full of glass bottom clouds merch they got to sell. You know, so they can't leave. They can't leave because they're committed to their thought, not to the process. You know, and I would call the process, you know, scientific, although that term's been completely bastardized and turned into a new form of clergy. But yeah, and I think I'm beginning to think. See, I've gone through life thinking that, and I still employ the golden rule. You know, you have to kind of empathy requires that you go, well, how would I feel about it? To how they would feel about it, to recognize your own emotions in others and stuff, and you want to get along. But I've kind of ignorantly or hopefully or, you know, naively gone through life thinking, well, people, if they just understood this way of doing things, they would come around, they'd see the benefit in doing this. But I'm pulling back from that because I haven't found, again, I didn't choose to think this way. You know, I have derived joy from it, and I notice my own patterns of benefit, but I can also look and say, well, the other herd people, the people who think more like a herd, who find an ideology, stand behind it, doesn't matter what the ideology is, where it came from, it could be entirely based on myth. The fact is they have a herd of people, or a group of people around them, and that group of people actually provides them more safety than a loner like me. And that's the difference. The difference is that some people want to find safety in the herd. They don't really care about what the thought or the idea is. It's my opinion, their guidance system is purely peripheral vision. You know, they sense the movements of the herd and they go, what is the herd saying? That's what I'm going to say. I want to stay nice and comfortably in this herd. And when you hear a guy like me say that, because I've chosen not to be that way, or I was born not that way, whatever the case may be, it sounds like I'm insulting them, like, oh, you're just a sheep, you're a herd. But how can you be upset when people are just that way? That's what I'm coming to realize is like, it's silly to try to turn a pigeon into a horse, or a zebra into a panther. Things are going to be what they're going to be. And I can point to lots of examples in nature where it's probably smart for a person to use their peripheral vision. It's probably smart for a person to not be like me. Look at me. I got one offspring who I didn't raise, never got to enjoy the family kind of thing. And while other people, I got people in my family who have many grandchildren already. I'm never going to have any grandkids. So trying to pull people in, and that's part of this way of thinking, the individual way of thinking, the loner kind of way of thinking. That's kind of where it goes. I think it's more of an anomaly when you find people that with this kind of thinking that also have 20 grandchildren, or that also run a huge business, or that are managers, or that, because it's a completely different way of thinking. You could call it psychopathy, you could call it antisocial behavior, maybe, if you wanted to. I don't see it as that because I don't see it as being dangerous, but the idea that you have to have something that you're born with where you don't really care what the whole group thinks. I mean, maybe that's putting a little bit rough. You do care. Like, it's not like I don't care what anybody thinks. It's fun to say that, but I wouldn't be making these recordings or anything if I didn't care what people think. I wouldn't be making music. I wouldn't be making art if I absolutely didn't care. The difference is that it won't change what I'm going to say. It's not going to change my behavior, if the crowd doesn't approve. The crowd is not going to nudge me into a belief that doesn't more closely align with reality. And that's the key. Does it align with reality or not? And if it aligns with reality, I'm not going to budge to the group. I'm not going to just go, okay, you guys are right, because you guys, have a large group and you can make things inconvenient for me. I mean, in certain survival situations, I might, tip my hat and go, okay, cool for you, and go somewhere else without causing a lot of fuss. But even then, I'm more likely to cause the fuss. I'm more likely to stand there with a megaphone and say, you're all wrong. You are all wrong. The shit that you're peddling does not align with reality. Think this way. But that could be, there are advantages to being a loner. There are advantages to being in a tribe or a herd or a flock or whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, you are who you are, and you can either be authentic or not. But the problem is, and this is what's so frustrating for people like me, is that it's not subjective. Reality isn't subjective. It's objective. So when you meet people that are going up against objective truth, or they're inventing subjective fantasies and they demand that you conform to them, that can be very frustrating. It's not about just feeling lonely. It's about just being bewildered by the myths and the demands, the violent demands. You must conform. I mean, and this is the right wing, this is the left wing. This is not a, I find the herd members are the herd type people, the sheep, are on both sides. Okay, you got right wing sheep people. And before you get upset about me using sheep, think of Jesus calling them sheep. He said it lovingly. So I'm not nearly as loving as that, but at least try to impose that. It's not a real insult, you know. I wouldn't call it a compliment, but I don't know, let's just call it an agnostic commentary on the way they behave, you know. But when the whole flock, when the whole herd gets out the pitchforks and they form a mob, it's much more fun to think of them as a flock of sheep, an angry mob, behaving like an angry hive of wasps coming to kill you because you don't want to be a drone anymore. Anyway, I'm meandering, but I don't know. I don't know. I think that it's fun to imagine that maybe there are people with this kind of, I don't know, rudimentary, fundamental personality disorder or quirk or, attribute, feature, that don't end up like this. But I sometimes imagine that there are people that are fundamentally like me, but for whatever reason, they made a decision to go along with the flock, to keep a job and to get into a corporate lifestyle or into their church or whatever it is, and they're just their whole life they're suppressing that feeling, because in the moments that I do suppress it, which sometimes I will. This is why I don't hang out with people, quite frankly. Because when I get into a group, it becomes more and more apparent. All those group dynamics, all those tribal rules and everything, they become very apparent. And it just, holding my tongue has got to be one of the most unpleasant things in the world for me. Just grinning and bearing it and just going, okay, while everybody's doing a group activity, group participation, team sport, this, whatever. They're all doing it. Meanwhile, I feel my face getting hot. I feel this like crushing sense of urgency to get the fuck out of there. But also the feeling like, oh man, I should, because there's so much social pressure to actually have friends and to get along. So there is this sense where you want to go, no, I'm a person that gets along. I get along great with people because, in my history, I have been able to get along well with people when I'm teaching the class or when I'm on stage or when I'm somehow in control of directing their attention. When I can somehow be the steward over the immediate circumstances. So, being a good teacher or being a popular teacher, or being a popular performer or a good performer or in any way does kind of gives you the sense that you get along with people. But that's not really true, because I don't really get along with people one-on-one for very long. I might for a while, 4-hour window here, 4-hour window there with a drink, But as soon as morning comes and they want me to have breakfast with them, they want to share decision duties on things that don't require a committee, like what I'm going to eat, where I'm going to eat, when I'm going to sleep, when I'm going to wake up, which direction I'm going to drive, when I'm going to go to the beach, when I'm going to get out of bed. All those things that don't require committee, tribal approval. that's where getting along with individual people just comes to a screeching halt. It really does. I mean, and I can push it and I can try. Okay, I'll do it. I'll be a better person. I'll be a better person. I'll get along with people better. I got to be social. They invite you to a party. You go to the party. Everybody decides they're going to go this way, and you're suddenly, I mean, you want to know one of the other things in the world that just I find almost unbearable is walking in a group. I can kind of walk with another person. But this was even frustrating for me when I was a Mormon missionary. You go 2 by 2s. Walking at the same speed as somebody else is just like, or walking side by side. I can do it, and I apply a bunch of rules to it. You're like, well, you should walk by side. So if somebody goes out in front or somebody falls behind, there's this, Anyway, it's just hard to fucking relax. It's hard to fucking relax when you're walking with one person. But at least with one person, it's kind of manageable, but barely. But walking with a group, oh God, just misery. I've done it before, people say, hey, come over, let's hang out. We're all going to go do something. Let's smoke pot and walk to the mall. 5 people. It's just like, oh my God, I got to manage and walk. I got to walk at their speed. I don't want to fucking walk at your speed. I know where I'm going. And I know what I want to look at. If I want to slow down, there's a nice plant right here I want to see. I want to watch this bird. I saw a person duck into a doorway over there. They look shifty. I want to camp out here to see what happens when they come out. And I don't want to decide this by committee. Because the committee isn't ever right. They just never are. I mean, democracy is such a bad idea. It is such a bad idea. I don't know how. I'm glad that America's not a democracy. I'm so glad that it was designed not to be. It's turning into one, and that's scary because it's really just mob rules. It's majority rule. It's brute strength. It's tribal. It's herd. It's just like you fucking better get with a tribe or die. Look, guys like me are supposed to live out in the mountains in a 12 by 12 cabin writing manifestos. Let's be honest. I don't have the resentment that old Ted Kaczynski had, I don't think. I think he must have had some kind of resentment about it. I don't really have that. I mostly have gratitude for it. And that's another part of the thing that I think that's, I was telling this woman that all my life, circling back, like people have called me argumentative, disagreeable, all the things that I said earlier. And it takes a certain amount of confidence to be that way. Is it? I don't even know if it's confidence. Like I made up this word, delufidence, years ago to describe this. It can't be confidence because confidence seems to be derived from knowing something, where delusion, similar, but it's just thinking everything's going to be fine. Or so I called it delufidence. And it's a blessing and a curse. So I've said for many years that I was blessed with a gooful dose of delufidence. Gooful being good and awful. Depending on what day, that's what it is. But regardless, I have been unable to find any kind of motivation or imagined benefit from not being authentically me and just who I am, regardless. Even though I can see the benefits, even though I can see these people with large families and grandkids and these people that have these nice companies and bands, perhaps, they travel the world and they have five brothers and five friends and a staff that they like to get along with, and they, go around the world and they seem to have this really tight knit community. I see this in groups of friends in San Francisco. These house music sunset camp out kids. I actually really liked them. There's a group of these people that I was if you would ever imagine the cast of Friends, they're a tight knit group of friends. And they've always been tight, and they still are. After 20 years, the same people are still getting along. They might gripe and say, I don't really hang out with those people anymore. And then 2 minutes later, I see a picture of them with some of them at the beach. So it's like, and at a time, for those kinds of groups, there's been many casts of friends where I've been like the Tom Selleck visiting role, or who else was a visiting cast member? Who's that handsome guy that everybody likes? Ant-Man, that played Ant-Man. I've been allowed into groups like that as one of those people where maybe they even kind of wanted me to join the cast, but I could never fully commit because I never felt like I fit in, or it's not even the feeling of not fitting in. It's just no desire that was pressing enough to make it happen, to sacrifice the things that one has to sacrifice to make something like that happen. And if you want to be on the cast of Friends, you got to be willing to read from the script. You got to be willing to collectively bargain and act as a group. If you want to be a part of a group of friends, you got to show up to birthday parties you don't want to go to. You got to walk as a group to the beach. You got to put your towel down next to theirs and keep it there until the group decides it's time to leave. You can't just do the Irish goodbye or the French exit, which is what I was always doing back in the day, and I still do. Still to this day, I always think that if you have to go to a group event, I don't believe in announcing departures. I don't believe in saying, it was nice to see you guys, but now I have something better to do. Make it all about me. I think the best thing to do is just leave and send a text later saying, thanks for inviting me. No big hullabaloo. No committee decisions. But I understand that, in the whole scheme of things, your average person weighing, I don't know. I guess it's the grass is greener thing, because I do have friends, and I assume they all just say it, but it was more back in the day. Like back in the day, certain friends of mine with families and wives and all the struggles that come along with those things would express that they had, and they could have just been doing this to be nice for all I know. They could have been just doing bless your heart kind of stuff, but they'd be like, oh man, I'd give anything. Don't get married, dude. You got it so good. You got freedom. You can do whatever the fuck you want and blah, blah, blah. And I've seen that, but I've seen a lot of that dissipate as people have gone from just being in weird relationships with their wives to now being grandparents, and that's a lot of it has to do with that. I've essentially, as I get older, I just answer the phone less. I maintain friendships less. I'm not the maintainer. There are a couple of friendships that I maintain where I am the maintainer, and even there, it's very low effort. It's very low effort. One friend in particular from San Francisco, I think she's very funny. We've written some scripts together, written some songs together, but I know that she just finds my voting for Trump abhorrent and the things that I post. But yet she'll still wish me happy birthday and laugh at the jokes or whatever. But that's one of the very few ones where I feel like I'm maintaining. Like I'll send the text more of I respond to hers and I send more. That's a few. That's just one of a few, and it's still very low effort. We're talking about one text every 6 months or whatever. But most of the time, anybody that stays in my life, it's because they are making the effort. And I'm grateful that there are some people that do that. right up until the time where they say, hey, I'm passing through town. Are you free? Let's go do something. That's when I don't want to answer the text. That's when I'm like, oh, crap. Can I get out of town fast? And these are people that I like, okay? And when I do actually get together with them and go have lunch or have them over, I genuinely and generally really enjoy it. I go, that wasn't so bad. All that, worry about being trapped in their company, once it actually happens, and quite frankly, some of the times when it happens, and it comes to an end after 4 or 5 hours, I think, oh, that wasn't so bad, and I wish it could go on for another couple of hours. So, these things are malleable. Anyway, so I don't know what I'm getting at. This has definitely been one of those situations where I'm using this stupid fucking phone as a shrink. And if you've made it this far into the recording, I probably owe you, a half an hour's worth of wage? I don't owe you shit, okay? You don't have a degree. You're not a shrink. But regardless, thanks for listening. Unnecessary outro.